Now, I don't know whether you recognise the voice of the person doing the commentary there, but it was of Raymond Baxter, of course, the voice of Tomorrow's World. And I'm delighted to say that he is one of our studio guests today, along with John Hutchinson, a former Concorde pilot. Raymond Baxter, first of all, coming to you. Was it a fantastic moment when you heard the thunderous roar of those engines and you saw it take off?
Oh yes, unforgettable experience. I've been a passionate advocate for Concorde ever since the project was first launched, and here was the realization of a dream. Any maiden flight is exciting, but the maiden flight in France and then at Filton, one was acutely aware of the historic significance of what we were watching in the conclusion of the long period of development flying before the first passenger was carried. Here was the dawn of a new era, and today, sadly, we are marking the end of that era. And I had to say there's more fuss today than there was on the first day of flight.
And John Hutchinson, if we look at it, you can see there Concorde making its progress towards London. So roughly what altitude would you say they're at there?
Well, it's difficult to say from those pictures, but I suspect you're right. I think they probably are getting clearance to fly in at a rather lower altitude than normal, so probably somewhere around 1,500 feet, I would guess at. And all I know is that that chap's going to be concentrating very hard on making a most immaculate approach and a most immaculate touchdown. We'll get our score charts out.
Yeah, how easy will it be for him to put out of his mind the emotion of the moment, the historical significance of the moment, and just be concentrating on, right, am I doing everything that I would always do in the run-up to a landing?
I can only compare it with my last flight on Concorde when I retired, and I just felt I did not want to walk away from that aeroplane. That lovely airplane that meant so much to me over 15 years, having done a sort of bit of a shot-down type of arrival. Unfortunately, I did a very smooth landing, and I'm sure that's the way all these three chaps will want to end their Concorde careers.
How difficult as a plane is it to land?
It's a very easy airplane to land. It's settled, that great delta wing compresses the air between the runway surface and the wing, and it sort of settles into that ground cushion effect. The trick is to actually land very smoothly.
Raymond Baxter, we talk about you, and you know, me growing up, I remember you, of course, as the Tomorrow's World presenter. What do you feel? It seems like we're going back to yesterday's world today, yes, by saying that the supersonic age has ended.
Well, yes, I share your emotions exactly. I think what we are seeing today is a national wake. It's a cross between a celebration and mourning. And I am mourning in the sense of grief, you know what I mean. My hope, my profound hope, is that Concorde will be seen flying again. And quite frankly, I am not certain why she's being taken out of service. The aeroplane has operated impeccably all those years and is today, as we can see, operating impeccably, forecasting the arrival at the end of the runway to the nearest second. And I remember so clearly when it started, and there was a certain amount of suspense, even though André Turcard, the French test pilot, and Brian Trubshaw had done it on the simulator, they could never be sure how it would actually handle.
And we're just getting these wonderful pictures there from the helicopter. And I think another Concorde was coming the other way, so I don't know whether they're on some kind of pattern of coming in sort of some kind of formation. But there's the very wide shot that we're showing you of the Concorde. Now we can go in tighter as the plane comes in, and these are photos of these pictures are coming to you live from our helicopter that we've put up over London to get these marvelous images of Concorde against a sort of autumn cloud cover. That has, luckily, it's been cold on the ground today and a little windy, but it has been a very fine day with very good visibility, and that's why we're able to bring you these fabulous images. John Hutchinson, let me bring you in as well there, because I saw you were nodding vigorously to when Raymond Baxter was saying, this is a premature end.
I absolutely was nodding vigorously. I agree with that completely. The airplane should not, in my view, be ending its career today. It's got at least 8 or 10 years life left in it. And it just saddens me. I hope maybe a consortium, or Sir Richard Branson, or a consortium involving Sir Richard Branson, maybe we'll get together and enable one to fly on as a heritage airplane. That would be magnificent.
Now, the fact that the landing gear is already down, does that suggest that it is very close to landing?
That'll mean he's about 5 miles or so out from the runway threshold, roughly speaking.
Right. And so then a matter of minutes to go before it's due to touchdown?
Yep.
Let me just stay with you on the whole question of whether it is viable or non-viable. Isn't the problem that it was technologically spectacular, aesthetically wonderful, but commercially a disaster?
Well, people say it was commercially a disaster. I don't think it was. I think British Airways did extremely well with Concorde, bearing in mind that they acquired it from the British taxpayer at a knockdown price, whatever that may be. People have quoted a mythical £1 figure, but, you know, on that sort of basis, I believe that British Airways could hardly fail to make money with the airplane. In the years that I was on it, the break-even load factor was around 40%, and we used to get average load factors on the airplane of around 60%.
Okay, let's just keep you with these pictures here. And Raymond Baxter, did you actually get to fly? I mean, I know you were in Toulouse for the test flight. Did you fly Concorde?
Yes, I did. Thanks to my great friend Brian Trubshaw, the late Brian Trubshaw, and John Cochrane, who was co-pilot. I went on quite a few of the proving flights before passengers came aboard, and we did one of the early proving flights with passengers to Morocco. And everyone who was anyone in aviation was on that flight.
But explain to me this, why did no other airline buy Concorde? Why? We've seen the British, oh, look at that shot now. We've got Concordes there sort of stacking up.
Oh, my goodness, look at that. Oh, gracious. That's the kind of thing we never even saw at Farnborough. Yeah. I flew in Concorde over Farnborough, her one and only appearance there, with John Cochrane, and I'll never forget that. But to see two Concordes over Heathrow, I never, ever imagined I would see that. Did you, John?
No. It's a spectacular sight, isn't it? Stream landing, almost.
Yes, and so wonderful for the thousands of people who've gone to enormous lengths to see this. I know of a very distinguished elderly lady.
I don't know whether we can come to the studio camera here, but you can see it now coming into land behind us. Right behind where we're speaking to you from now. And there we are, Concorde is coming in behind us, the first of the Concordes to land. And you can hear the roar. And you can actually, as I look around, you know, I can see a number of people, and everyone is standing absolutely still. Everyone is just looking to the sky to watch this Concorde come down on the northerly runway. John, what sort of speed is it doing now as it's coming into land?
He'll be doing roughly about 157 knots, something like that. And, oh, well, I think we'll say a little gust of wind caught him.
Was there a little bounce there, or was that my imagination?
No, it was a gust of wind.
You're being loyal. You're being loyal to your fellow fraternity of Concorde pilots.
Oh, dear. He won't be pleased.
He won't be pleased.
Remember, this aeroplane lands and takes off a great deal faster than your average jumbo.
And the reverse thrust that you must need to get to brake it, is that, do you feel that jolting?
There are two things about the deceleration of Concorde on landing. The reverse thrust is extraordinarily effective, and the carbon fibre wheel brakes, which have pioneered the wheel brakes for all the sort of modern Airbuses and so on, and all modern airplanes, are incredibly efficient in terms of absorbing energy. You can stop a Concorde. I've stopped one at Cardiff in about 4,000 feet of runway.
Yeah, and I mean, I can just see the next one coming in behind us now, which I suspect will be touching down in a couple of minutes' time. But you talk about that. We talk about the technological advances made by Concorde for Concorde, but presumably the technological advances had other spin-offs in other areas of life, and we've got another magnificent shot of one Concorde coming into land and another Concorde sort of stacking up behind it. There must have been other the technological advances, just like the moon landing, I don't know, gave us Teflon, for example. There must have been things associated with Concorde.
Oh, absolutely many. And not least the worldwide prestige which it won for British aviation, British engineering. And there is no doubt that the spin-off effect of Concorde almost immeasurable. For instance, Airbus would not have been formed had it not been for the cooperation between England and France in the construction of this aeroplane. Another thing we haven't mentioned, which is unique, is the thrust of power when Concorde accelerates from the cruising speed of a normal jumbo to supersonic speed, and you literally go back in your seat like that.
There she comes.
But this, of course, is absolutely the reverse process.
Lovely. She's such a gorgeous sight when she comes into land. She always reminds me of some swan touching down on a lake or something. It's such an elegant, long-necked, beautiful creature.
We haven't mentioned the drooped snoot, the famous drop nose, which makes it possible to take off and land this aeroplane, which has an attitude so different from any other airliner.
And the droop snoot, incidentally, is just so that the pilots can actually get a decent view of the runway. With the nose up, the poor old pilot coming into land would have his view of the runway totally obscured.
So it has to do it. In fact, I mean, I tell you what, I want to pause slightly now, because what we're seeing now is flight 002, and this is going to be the final Concorde that people are going to see coming into land at Heathrow Airport. This is it. This is the end of the era. This is the final one that we're going to see in the skies, and I suspect it's got probably a minute and a half left before it comes onto the runway and then taxis round. I think it will almost do a lap of honour around the airport to come onto the stand. John, just tell me what you're thinking now.
I was actually thinking about the staff at Kennedy Airport, the British Airways staff, who will miss it madly. They were fantastic to us. In fact, the whole of the Port of New York Authority and the air traffic controllers at Kennedy Airport were treated Concorde with tremendous help and assistance and cooperation.
Tell me this, being a pilot on Concorde, were you treated as somehow something different? A cut above the rest almost. I mean, or that maybe other pilots felt a little chippiness because to fly that beautiful thing.
It wasn't us that were a cut above the rest. It was that aeroplane that was a cut above the rest. We were all we were the privileged pilots and flight engineers who were allowed to operate that aeroplane for all those years.
And did you feel that? Look, here it comes now.
I certainly did feel that.
And down she comes.
Settling down. Lovely.
Puff of smoke from the
Perfect.
wheels.
And then once that nose wheel touches down, that's when we bring the reverse thrust and the carbon fibre brakes swing into action. Lovely sight. You can hear the reverse thrust coming through the studio. All
So what is it? Sadness, a feeling of pride, sadness? What is the mixture of emotions, John Hutchinson?
Sadness for me, predominantly. But pride that the aeroplane has achieved so much in its commercial life, and it's demonstrated that supersonic flight is doable and that there are huge benefits to supersonic flight, and I'm sure there will be a successor to Concorde at some stage.
I had the misfortune of being the BBC's Paris correspondent when Concorde crashed, and I went out to Gonesse that evening. And there was a feeling then that would Concorde ever fly again? Did you think it was right to make all the investment in the aircraft to bring it back for what has been a relatively short period of time?
I'll tell you what I do think, very strongly indeed. I don't believe that British Airways should ever have grounded their Concordes.
And you can see, I think we can see the Union flag poking out of the window there.
Yes.
As possibly the most famous nose in the world. And just look at the people behind, the ground crew. They've probably all got other things they're meant to be getting on with. But the whole airport, I suspect, at Heathrow has come to a halt for these three Concordes.
Just to go back very briefly to what you were saying, if you cast your mind back, you'll remember that after that dreadful event at Paris, British Airways carried on operating their Concordes for about 3 weeks with a whole lot of very tight checks and procedures agreed with the Civil Aviation Authority. And it was eventually, I'm afraid, pressure mainly from France that it ended up with the grounding of the airplane, which I believe was completely unjustified and slurred the reputation of a magnificent airplane.
Now, how much do you think that you've touched on something, and this is a day of kind of, you know, let's talk about the reality of today as well. There has been something of a battle, hasn't there, between the French and the British over whether to keep Concorde going?
Yes, I think that's fair to say that, and I think part of it stems from the fact that there's much more in the way of business links between London and New York than there are between Paris and New York. So British Airways had a sort of commercial advantage over the French in that sense. Also, because London was crucially that much closer to New York, it wasn't such a tight operation from an operational point of view for British Airways as it was for Air France. So Air France did have problems that British Airways did not have. So basically British Airways were able to operate profitably in a way that Air France perhaps couldn't.
Okay. Look, let's go outside the studio, because there have been huge crowds that have been gathering to watch Concorde's return, and Catherine Marsden is with those crowds of people who've been in the grandstands, probably shivering cold but hugely excited and maybe sad by what they've got. Now to the pictures live at Heathrow Airport as these three Concordes make their way slowly, elegantly, gently back to the stand here at the engineering base for Concorde planes. And you know, like athletes when they've just won a race and they sort of take their tops off and they grab a flag and they run around the racetrack. Well, I think Concorde is doing something pretty similar here right now. You can see them just slowly in formation turning around the airport, and you can be absolutely sure that whatever airline people are working for today, and you can see the Union flag poking out of the window there as the noses droop down as it prepares to come in, that there are people lining the apron, waving, clapping, feeling a part of this day, a day of sort of extraordinary mixed emotions, I guess, of exhilaration and extreme kind of disappointment, sadness, depression, whatever, that the era of supersonic commercial travel has come to a close. And so you'll see the Concordes now just ever so slowly making their way across, and look at the crowds there, just everyone standing still. I'm sort of completely struck by it. And you know, it's not just today. I mean, I remember kind of something as mundane as taking a car back to the hire car place, and suddenly everyone rushing out from, I don't know, the Hertz rent-a-car or Europe car, whatever, because Concorde was about to take off. Now, it took off every day, but yet all the staff still wanted to see it. There is something that is, you know, that makes people stop what they're doing to look at Concorde. And this is a plane, as David Shookman was reporting there, that entered its first commercial service to Bahrain in 1976. So the novelty, you would have thought, would have ended, and yet it still goes on. Well, I'm joined in our studio now by the person who I guess has made the decision that it's time to end the era of supersonic flight, and that's British Airways Chief Executive Rod Eddington. Rod Eddington, we're looking at these pictures now. This must be a day of mixed emotion for you as well.
Indeed, and for everyone in the BA team. Sadness that we're retiring an icon in our flagship, celebration that she's carried 2.5 million customers over nearly 30 years and done so in enormous style.
I have to say, I've been here since this morning, and everyone I've spoken to has sort of said, was it really necessary? Did they really have to take this decision? Was this plane really past it?
Very tough decision, obviously, for all of us in BA, not just for me, but for the senior team who are involved in it. A mixture of economics and the realities of the world in which we live, and operating robustness. Concorde is a remarkable aeroplane, the oldest aeroplane in our fleet, although it doesn't look it still looks the most modern, such is its grace and elegance. And like all old aeroplanes, increasingly difficult and expensive to maintain.
Was there a hint of politics in it too, that maybe the French, after the tragedy at Gonesse, had lost the will to keep Concorde going? It was expensive, it was losing money, let's call it quits?
No, in a sense, without the French, we would never have got Concorde back into the air again in 2001. Remember, after that terrible, tragic crash in Paris in mid-2000, it was a joint effort by Airbus, by British Airways and Air France that actually got the aeroplane back into the air. Very much against the odds. A lot of people thought she would never fly again after that terrible tragedy.
Now, let's push on to the future. You've got 7 Concordes that are going to sit here. Is it absolutely 100% definite, certain, that they will never fly again?
I don't think any of us can say that with that amount of certainty. We're working very hard to see if it's possible to fly Concorde in a heritage role. It's never been done with an aeroplane of this complexity before. It's people trying to get a Vulcan bomber, which is a jet aeroplane too, back in a heritage mode. They've been trying for some time. We haven't ruled it out, but it's clear that it's extremely difficult.
But what about, I mean, I'm hearing all sorts of things today, and inevitably, on such a momentous day, there are going to be all sorts of rumours doing the rounds, but that there might be different consortia who would try to buy it and keep one or two of them flying commercially. Would you countenance that idea?
Well, it's clear that the aeroplane's not going to fly commercially again. It's clear to all of us. Airbus have made it very clear. We're clear that Concorde's sadly come to the end of what is a remarkable innings. But Airbus have made it very clear too, as the descendant manufacturers, that Concorde's type certificate was withdrawn at the end of this month, and it will no longer fly in a commercial sense. I think there is a chance it can fly in a heritage sense. It's an unlikely outcome, but it's something I think we'd all like to see. The real question is it possible?
And where will these Concordes be dispersed to now?
Okay. Well, it's the first and most important thing is that we get good geographic coverage here in the UK, and the majority of them will obviously stay in the UK. We want to be sure that wherever you live within the United Kingdom, you've got a chance to go and see one. So we're looking at museums around the country that not only want the aeroplane, because of course every museum wants the aeroplane, but is able to look after it appropriately and properly so that it will be still something to be viewed in a piece of great beauty in 30 or 40 years' time. But she is also...
But absolutely, certainly, it's not going to fly. You're not going to be taking fee-paying passengers again in any capacity.
That's clear. That's absolutely clear.
So it's a question of whether there's a minor heritage role for it to do air shows or, you know, fly past at big national occasions.
Precisely. And the question of which museums it goes to is also important. I mean, it is a global superstar. And you can say that of very few things. Usually it's people we think of in that context. But Concorde's a global superstar. And
well, look at that. Let's look at this. What's happening here?
Yes, it's been given a traditional aviation guard of honour by the people in the fire services and the engineering folk here at Heathrow, as the 3 aeroplanes taxi around the perimeter of the airfield. We're hoping that they'll be able to stop in front of our operational centre, the Compass Centre, and salute the many men and women who've operated Concorde as cockpit crew and cabin crew before they finally come back to the hangar, where the aeroplanes can salute the engineering teams who've worked so hard to keep this aeroplane aloft.
Is it fair, when we look at these fabulous pictures, to say, look, Concorde has been the most spectacular technological achievement, but commercially it has been, you'd have to judge, a dud. No other airlines board it, apart from, you know, the originators, Air France and British Airways. It struggled for some time, and now the plug has been pulled.
The aviation lover in me would resist that comment, but there is certainly a ring of truth in what you say. Concorde, any manufacturer will tell you that you have to sell between 400 and 500 aeroplanes of a particular type before you recover your development costs. Less than 20 Concordes were sold, so in pure economic terms, the construction program wasn't a success. That's absolutely clear.
And if you were to cite one reason for the failure, what was it? Was it oil prices in the 1970s, jealousy from the Americans? I mean, you weren't there. You're not burdened by the history of this. You're a relatively new chief executive.
I think there are a couple of things that probably contributed to that, and you've mentioned one of them. Concorde was thought about in the 50s, designed and built in the 60s. The first test flight was in the late 60s. Of course, the first oil shock was in the mid-70s, and fuel prices skyrocketed. Supersonic travel's a very thirsty piece of work, and therefore clearly the cost of fuel meant that Concorde's costs soared. The other thing I think was that when it was conceived, environmental issues didn't drive much of what happened in aviation. The sonic boom was never thought to be the sort of problem that it was clearly going to be when Concorde actually first entered commercial service in the mid-70s. So I think it was those two things more than anything that meant that about 20 were made, only a dozen or so sold, and we were well short of the 500.
OK, Rod Eddington, Chief Executive of British Airways, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this particular day. Well, of course, one of the great advocates of supersonic travel was the Duke of Edinburgh. Now, he's been speaking
Duke of Edinburgh there
with his own recollections of Concorde, and let me just bring you the pictures here that we have now as the Concorde make their way ever so slowly. I can imagine, often I would imagine pilots are in a great rush to get to their stand, and they just, you know, at the end of a flight, end of a long flight, they want to, you know, unwind and stop. And I suspect this is one of those moments where people just never want the moment to end. They want to drag this out for as long as is humanly possible, because they know that this is the last time they're probably going to sit in the at the cockpit in control of Concorde. And I should imagine it's just the same for the passengers, just the same for the stewardesses. There'll be no rush to leave the aircraft. That moment when you hear the engine shut down and you can take your seatbelts off and everyone goes rushing for their bags in the overhead compartment. I don't think anyone will be rushing today. I think they'll be taking their time and pausing. But these Concordes still have not reached the engineering base where we are now, and we're waiting for them to arrive. Everything is being got ready outside here, but these Concordes are still making their way slowly around the perimeter of the vast complex that is Heathrow Airport. Now, Rod Endington has gone, but we are rejoined by John Hutchinson, a former Concorde pilot, and by Jamie Bowden too, who is now an airline consultant, but you worked for many years for British Airways in their communications, head of communications, and know Concorde inside out. Jamie, let me come to you first. So many people I've spoken to today have said, I'm going to struggle to keep a dry eye. Has it been like that for you?
Absolutely. I think along with most other people that have worked for BA over the past 26, 27 years, I worked for BA for nearly 22 years, and Concorde just becomes almost part of your everyday life, particularly if you work here at Heathrow. I've spoken to a lot of my colleagues who I've worked with over the years, over the past 2 or 3 days, and they've said that they find it not just a very emotive day, I think, but some of them said it's almost going to be an unbearable day for them. And I think Concorde has just symbolised not just that it's BA's flagship and has been for the last 27 years, but that she is a much, much loved head of the family.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because, you know, when you work for a big organisation, whether it's British Airways or even the BBC, dare I say, you know, employees tend to be kind of cynical and they hate the organisation and they moan about this and they moan about that. Are you really telling me that people weren't cynical about Concorde, or was Concorde different? Was there something, a sort of sprinkling of stardust, a bit of magic about it?
Yeah, I think that's a fair description. I think that if you look at people who have spent a lot of their working life in BA, Concorde has been such a unique selling point for British Airways, yes, of course, with Air France as well, but BA marketed Concorde very well over those years, and I think, as John said earlier, if you went back to the 80s, you saw that Concorde was really involved in most of BA's major promotions. Right up until 1997, if you remember, BA put on a competition where you could win a seat on Concorde for £10. And that was to celebrate the 10 years since privatisation in 1987. And that brings the whole of the airline together. If there has been one thing that has absolutely brought the whole of the airline and its 50,000 staff together over the past 27 years, it's this thing standing out there, it's Concorde.
Yeah, did it make you rethink marketing in a way? That it was somehow, you had to treat Concorde differently from other things, because there were the charter flights, there were the special kind of little tours around the Bay of Biscay flights. It was somehow done differently than you do normal commercial aircraft.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at commercial airlines in the world today, 400 or 500 major airlines spread throughout the world, there were only ever 2 airlines that flew Concorde, so there were only ever going to be 2 airlines that could use Concorde, not just as a flagship, but its chief marketing tool. And one of the things that I think British Airways did well was to use Concorde really for either prestigious promotions or for key anniversaries. So, for example, Concorde, over the past 2 or 3 years, was there for the state opening of Parliament, royal anniversaries.
And there we can see just these exclusive helicopter shots that the BBC have got with this, the bird in the eye. And look at that fabulous view of the Concordes as they slowly taxi round. John, you know this airport. You've parked the Great White Bird before. Whereabouts are we now in the airport? Can you get a sense of where we are?
I haven't got a clue.
I've so often wanted to say that when I've been asked a question on television, you know, when I've been asked to speculate about something where you've got no reason for knowing, and I've never dared say I haven't got a clue, but good answer.
I think, to be honest, they're just the other side there, the north side of this hangar that we're sort of looking at here.
Right, so they're seconds away from us. You're going to promise me that, John?
Well, my friend Jamie here and I agree. We're going to share responsibility for this.
Yeah,
okay.
You can see this is the main hangar. You can see on the screen there's the main hangar behind, and the 3 aircraft are coming behind this hangar that's right next to us now. So it's only a few minutes away.
You can see it now, the hangar behind. Yeah.
And I suppose it must be rather strange for the other pilots who are just operating normally today and have got their flight schedules, and they are kind of knowing, looking out the window, I would imagine, at Concorde as it's making its way round. And, you know, having to concentrate on their own job of taking off and going off to whatever destinations they're off to.
And there are probably lots of them sitting there wishing that they'd had the opportunity to fly Concorde, or even fly in Concorde. And now they'll never be able to do that.
Yes, I don't know whether I'm allowed to say this, but Rod Eddington just told me a fabulous story, because I'd said to him that I've never flown Concorde. And he said, well, my marriage was nearly on the rocks, unless so I had to spend £4,000 of my own money to get my wife a ticket so that she could go on one of the last flights. And he thought that his marriage wouldn't survive unless he got his wife onto Concorde. So even the chief executive of British Airways had to pull the stops out at the very last minute to get a flight for Mrs. Eddington.
Well, good for him.
Yeah, and here we can see that's our lovely shot again from the helicopter. I don't know where the third one's gone.
No, I don't know where the third one is.
I think the third one's a bit of a way behind.
And taxiing at the speed they're taxiing at, you'd have thought the third one would have had plenty of opportunity to catch up.
Okay, well, let's get someone else's recollection of Concorde. We can hear from Richard Branson. He's the owner of BA's chief rival, Virgin Atlantic, of course, and he's determined to keep Concorde flying. Somehow, he wants to buy them. He's offered a £1 coin. He told us how seeing Concorde as a young man inspired him to get involved in the airline industry. Richard Branson there, and we're back in the studio. We're waiting for the Concordes to come round. Those 2 Concordes that we've been showing you a little earlier that are sort of right behind each other, one of those is the Biscay flight, the other is the Edinburgh flight, and they are doing a lap of honour. They're doing a tour of the airport, going to all those far-flung corners that perhaps they don't often get to see, to wave their goodbyes to Heathrow. And the New York flight, I'm told, is being towed now round to where we are, and we should be seeing that very shortly. And so we'll get the New York flight in first, and that is being towed round. And as soon as that Hoves interview, we'll bring you the pictures of that. And that is why there's a slight delay. And so these 2 are going on. These 2 are kind of just having a little tour, a pleasure ride round Heathrow Airport, while the New York flight is brought in to the hangar here, where our studio has been built for this special occasion. John Hutchinson and Jamie Brennan, let me just get your thoughts on what Richard Branson was saying about perhaps buying Concorde and keeping it flying. Was that a public... I mean, Jamie, you know the way the world of the press works, and you know how Richard Branson operates, and he's a very successful businessman. Was that a good way of getting publicity, knowing it was frankly impossible that British Airways was going to sell?
I think deep down, my own personal view is that deep down, Richard Branson probably knew right from the word go, from when British Airways decided to retire the fleet, that he was not going to use them to remount a commercial scheduled service. I would imagine that, as he has said today, that he is looking at possibility of a heritage flight. My own personal view, once again, is that as BA have invested over £1 billion in Concorde in the last 28 years, if anybody is going to put up one of those flights, either for heritage purposes or for flypast or for air shows, then I think BA should be the first airline to have that crack. I must admit, I think that Sir Richard has galvanised a lot of public opinion to try and get a heritage flight, but as you heard Rod Eddington say just a few minutes ago,
yeah, I just was going to ask
he hasn't completely ruled it out just yet.
Yeah, what did you make of what Rod Eddington...
The first thing I'd say is that I don't entirely agree with Jamie on what he said. I think actually Sir Richard Branson was very keen to operate Concorde if he could get the cost base right, and I think he was exploring the possibility of getting some other organisation like British Aerospace or Cobham PLC to take over the airworthiness responsibilities for Concorde, and I've reason to believe that there were indications that one or both of those companies were quite interested in doing that, and the block came again from Airbus. So I think Sir Richard was genuinely interested in taking on Concorde as a commercial operation.
What did you make of what Rod Eddington was saying? Did you feel that the door, I mean, it seemed to me he was pretty absolute and definite that for commercial flights, there's nothing.
Well, in about 6 weeks' time, something like that, December the 17th, it's the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers. I mean, it'd be rather fantastic to see Concorde flying down Carolina Beach, wouldn't it?
Do you think it's possible?
Well, he certainly didn't rule it out. He didn't rule out the fact that he was never going to fly again, did he?
No, he certainly didn't.
I think what we've seen today also is a huge difference in contrast between when Concorde entered service, when British Airways was a nationalised company, and now. British Airways has a duty to its shareholders, and of course Rod Eddington is going to say that if for the last year, 18 months, Concorde has been flying with 18 to 20 people, clearly it's not turning in the kind of profits that it should do. Its costs are going up. The maintenance regime means that more costs are going to have to be attributed over the next couple of years. And I think that Rod Eddington himself almost has had to justify to both his own shareholders and the rest of the board that it's the right decision. I believe that if we look at what happens over the next few years, supersonic passenger flight as a scheduled operation is going to stop. What airlines are trying to encourage and to try and use the priority now are to get bigger aircraft like the Airbus A380, double-decker aircraft. They need to get planes that fly longer, that are bigger, that have quieter engines, and that have better fuel efficiency. And that crucially makes those operations cheaper. And I think that's what most airlines are concentrating on. You've got a lot of the world's airlines now joining up with big marketing networks like One World. That's the way they're going. It's not necessarily just going to be operating single fleets.
So John, do you think that anyone is looking seriously at supersonic commercial travel?
Well, Lockheed is certainly looking at designs, aerodynamic designs, to alleviate the effects of the sonic boom. There's definitely work going on in the States in that direction. What they're trying to do is, whereas with Concorde, with its needle-pointed nose, it tends to concentrate the entire overpressure on the nose, what they're trying to do is to diffuse that overpressure along the whole length of the airplane, so reducing the level of the boom to just a sort of dull rumble. Now, if that sort of technology works, and you end up with an airplane that you can fly supersonic over populated land masses, that's the key thing, that then changes the entire dynamics of a supersonic transport operation. And when that day comes, and maybe we're talking about 20 years or maybe 30 years. We're talking about that sort of time frame, I think. When that day comes and you can fly from London to Sydney or New York to Tokyo in a matter of a few hours, I think the subsonic long-haul world will be left for dead at that point.
Let me bring you the pictures now of the New York flight. I've been kind of looking out of the corner of my eye that they've been arranging for it to come under tow, and they've been attaching various things to it. They've also got their Union flags flying proudly out of the cockpit windows, and I think it will be coming round to the stand any moment now, but I have been saying that for a little while and have been proved wrong every time I've said it, and so I'm hopefully going to be proved right this time, that it will indeed come into view, and that's the New York flight, whilst the Biscay and Edinburgh flights do a little tour of the airport.
I think I've just realised why that New York flight is not with the other two. It, of course, because it came in from New York, had to go and get clearance from Her Majesty's Customs and Immigration.
Even on special days like this?
Even on a special day like this. So what they've obviously done is taxi to a stand somewhere, or had some special arrangement for that, and shut the engines down, and they're now being towed from wherever they had that immigration and customs check back over here with the passengers still on board. That's what I guess has happened.
Will the pilots have to do any paperwork when they land? Do they have to file any kind of report, debrief, like you would if you were in the RAF, for example, and you've been on a mission?
You have to fill in the aircraft's technical log.
Right.
Recording all the defects, if any. I suppose it seems little point in doing that if it's never going to fly again.
But that's the normal routine, is it? You fill in the log.
Yep, that's the normal routine. It's a legal document. And you sign acceptance of the airplane when you board the airplane to take it somewhere on that tech log, and you hand it over to the next crew by signing it off on arrival.
We've got very little time left now. I just want to ask you to sum up emotion, feeling, response to today, John.
Great sadness, but great pride and a great sense of privilege that I was ever involved in the Concorde operation. I feel enormously privileged to have been part of the Concorde team. It's a great aeroplane. It's without doubt the most magnificent aeroplane I've ever flown, and I've flown well over 70 different types. It's in a class of its own. It's the Epsom Derby winner. It's the thoroughbred of the flying world.
Okay, well, ever since the invention of the wheel, man has striven to travel faster. But today may well be historic as the day we turned the technological clock back. The era of supersonic passenger air travel has come to a close. If you want to travel at twice the speed of sound, well, you'll either have to become a fighter pilot or wait a very long time before we see the like of Concorde again. Goodbye.